Okay, we begin our next section, if you want to call it the unit. We began the semester with that of natural selection, and we'll see some of those maybe aspects maybe repeat themselves, and we describe some of these animals. And then we moved on to that of microbiology unit, then we just finished the plants. Now we're going to do a section on that of the mammals, and then wrap up the year with human biology. So one of the things that I think everyone would agree upon when we're referring to that of the mammals is, of course, the biggest characteristic is that mammals have hair. And you'll be seeing that here in just a couple moments when we bring that slide up. As opposed to the rest of the animal kingdom, it's the mammals that are most advanced to that of any other type of animal. For those of you who take zoology, that'll become more apparent then. Okay, so one of the biggest characteristics that we see is that these animals can colonize the majority of any place on the planet, from the North Pole to that of the South Pole, where you'd see animals that can not only just exist but also thrive in such types of climates. And it's because these mammals and that of humans can produce their own body heat. They're not limited to where they can and can't live because of their internal temperature, if you want to call it that. So that's what we're referring to when we say the internal body heat or metabolism is internally, let's say, controlled. Okay, there's different ways that we know that animals and humans control that, and of course we're all familiar with that of sweating to lower temperature. Others is you'll notice when dogs get warm, they'll start panting and aspects like that. And if you are familiar with pigs on a hog farm, you'll notice that they don't have any sweat glands in their skin, so they actually sweat through their nose, which is actually kind of peculiar, but that's just what nature had selected those animals to do. Okay, so we also see not only is sweating a way of lowering our body temperature, we see heat can be lost at the body surface. Okay, and what we mean by that is as blood vessels dilate, one way to look at that is especially veins. You would notice on the top of your wrists. Okay, if anyone, of course, on the volleyball court, basketball court, or football field, as we have our body temperatures go up, these vessels then dilate. And what we mean by dilate is that diameter actually increases. And what that allows the human body to do is, as heat is being sent through the body's core, it will then go to the surface to where the exchange of heat can then be released to that of the atmosphere. And of course, just the opposite is also the case. To be in a cold environment, those vessels would then constrict and then be lower in the surface. That would actually conserve the body's heat then. So mammals have adapted that ability to either raise or lower their body temperature to meet the demands of their environment. And in order to be warm-blooded, there's only another set of animals besides humans that are also warm-blooded, and that is the birds. For those of you, again, who take zoology, you'll find out that the rest of the vertebrates, the fish, amphibians, and reptiles, of course, are all ectothermic, as opposed to what we see here with being endothermic. And if you're an ectothermic animal, again, you are limited to where you can live because your body temperature is the same as that of the environment. Now, even animals that live in a warm environment, they still may have to actually lay dormant and let the sun raise their body temperature. And some of you may be familiar with that, with maybe seeing snakes out sunning themselves, if you want to call it that. Again, that sun will raise their core body temperature. Okay, so for insulation, we said a major characteristic that what we would see with mammals is that they have hair. And it's going to be present in many different areas, and you might be thinking, well, what about whether it's the orca or killer whale, or maybe that of dolphins or blue whales or sperm whales, any one of those, we know that they are lung-breathing mammals. So where you would see different types of hair is going to be in their pharyngeal cavity, or where they swallow. Also, in that of another part of respiration is their, if you want to call it, their blowhole, where water is essentially pushed out of their oral cavity, and because that is tied into a type of feeding, especially whales that have baleen as teeth. And that's another characteristic or another term that you will be responsible for knowing. And there are a lot of them, because again, this is the pinnacle of the animal kingdom, those that are the most complex. And when we look at different types of hair, there's two types. You're going to notice that there are guard hairs and there's under hairs. And what a guard hair does is essentially just does that. It provides a protective surface for that on the skin. Then it's the under hair that actually provides the insulation. Okay? So when we look at mammals, we know that they are warm-blooded and that they have hair. Another aspect is they're going to be, of course, all are lung-breathing, and the vast majority of these mammals give birth to live young. There's just only a couple of exceptions to that. One is called the spiny anteater, or known as the echidna, and then the other one would be that of the duck-billed platypus. For some odd reason, nature had selected those mammals to still carry the characteristic of laying eggs. Okay, so warm-blooded, they have hair, and also a four-chambered heart. And we'll get into that here in just a moment. Okay, one of the things we had just mentioned, guard hair, just like we said, provides a protective layer underneath that of the underhair. And different aspects that we would see. Insulation, that's going to be the most common characteristic. Camouflage, you of course notice that of a mule deer, for instance, has that brown coat color, so it can blend into its surroundings. Sensory devices, that would be no surprise, provides information about surrounding. Waterproofing, of course, you would see that in different types. And signaling and defense. And for these two, you would see a type of defense mechanism in that of course, porcupines. It's those types of hairs that also exist as quills. And then a type of signaling aspect. One could be perhaps the back side of a tiger's ears are all coated in a type of white hair. Or the more common one would be that of maybe a skunk's behavior. And what that means is rather than going through the process of being sprayed, that defense mechanism that skunks have is very much like a characteristic of animals that have or produce venom, whether it's snakes, spiders, scorpions. It's one of those aspects is that complex protein known as a venom, okay? It's pretty taxing on that animal to produce that. So trying to conserve that material is going to be more beneficial. So just using the little bit of venom that they would need for food gathering is going to be more of a success rather than having to waste it on perhaps defense, as a defense mechanism. So for skunks in this defense type here, as a type of mechanism that they have, once they run out of the amount of spray in their rectal glands, they have to reproduce that. And again, that's pretty taxing on the body to continue to have to use that over and over and produce that. So what a skunk will do is, one, of course, it's going to rear up his back tail. That way, hey, it displays that, hey, I'm a skunk. You don't want to mess with myself. Another one be a type of hissing sound that they would make. And if those two displays do not work, well then that's when sometimes dogs have that problem of being sprayed. They maybe just haven't quite learned their lesson with that. And maybe some of you would be nodding your head, yes, I know, my dog went through that process as well. You might be talking to yourself. And that's rather unfortunate, and it probably only takes once, and they probably learn their lesson. Okay, so this is the characteristic that we're talking about, this four-chambered heart. Okay, so on each side there is a left atria and a left ventricle, a right atria and a right ventricle. Or you could say the top consists of two atria and two ventricles, and the bottom has the top has two atria and the bottom is two ventricles. Okay, so what we see happening is this oxygenated blood, okay, is kept separate from deoxygenated blood. And this heart is as you can see, a very efficient pumping mechanism, because it's not easy to maintain that core body temperature of being endothermic. So in order to have a high metabolism, these animals have to constantly send two critical aspects to our body cells. One of them is oxygen and the other is nutrients. So it's a product of intelligent design or evolution that mammals and humans are actually designed to actually keep that body temperature up, to be able to pump that oxygen and nutrients to the cells that desperately need this from time to time. Because you would notice, whether it's during track practice, football practice, volleyball, basketball, any one of those, or in any type of activity, it's not your heart does not tire. It's just the demands go up on the human body, or that of these mammals, that the heart is actually working harder to produce, or excuse me, not produce, but to deliver these vital nutrients that cells need, along with the oxygen, to keep that metabolism quite high. So again, in review, the major characteristic that mammals have is that they have hair, and they've got this four-chambered heart, and that they are warm-blooded. And we will come back to those aspects and explain them further at a later time. Now, this portion is just half of the material that is going to be, you'll be evaluated. The other half, for when you are gone, for some of you, for track, we had said this is where you will be completing these different orders of mammals. And we'll give you that handout, and you'll be responsible for filling this out for when you are missing class due to, of course, various activities. Of course, tomorrow's your next track meet. So we're talking about not just the animal kingdom, the chordate phylum that mammals are in, with birds, reptiles, fish, and amphibians, but then we move on to the mammalian class. So then now here we see the term mammalian orders. So all of these are different orders of mammals. And notice that what we had mentioned earlier is that a duck-billed platypus or echidna are two types of mammals that still lay eggs. That's a characteristic of the. Okay, so they lay eggs. Here's a characteristic. Here's a characteristic. It's typically the animal. So the first the first order we would talk about is Monotremata. These are animals that have webbed feet, and you can see, since they are aquatic mammal, they have waterproof fur, and that's another one of those aspects that we had mentioned earlier that hair has for a function. And other types of orders that you'll be responsible for, of course, here, not just you see opossums, kangaroos, are different types of, again, mammals that here we see still birthed alive young, but they're immature, and they develop inside the mother's pouch. So again, two characteristics. Here's the order, and there's the animals. Okay, there's 16 of these, I believe. And one of the things is you're not going to want to just try to pick out one of these characteristics just to say, oh, well, it's only this order that feeds on insects. Okay, that's certainly true. Bats, which are in a different order, that's Chiroptera, the only flying order of mammals that also feed on insects. They also have echolocation, and that's one of the aspects people like to say, man, they're just as blind as a bat. Well, what that means is bats actually use echolocation. And again, when you see the characteristic of echolocation, you don't want to limit that to just that of the bats, because there are different types of cetaceans. I had to think about that for a moment. That's what dolphins are in the order Cetacea. They also use echolocation. So it's one of these things we want to correlate some of these characteristics to the different orders, and then be able to remember the animals that belong in that order. And that will you become more familiar with them as we get a little further in the chapter. So there's, as you can tell, lots of vocab terms for this chapter. And I think that's what you would expect, because these are quite complex animals, and we will discuss this a little further at a later time. Okay, that's it for today. We'll catch up to you next time.